The prison barge shuddered as something massive struck the hull. I didn't flinch. Couldn't afford to. 3 broken ribs, left arm fractured in 2 places, and a concussion that made the dim lights blur into halos. But I kept my feet planted, kept my breathing steady, kept my eyes on the Kethran guard who'd just raised his shock staff toward the human child cowering in the corner. "Step back," I said. My voice came out level despite the fire in my chest. The guard's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Kethrans were 7 feet of chitinous muscle, bred for war across 100 conquered worlds. This one had decorative scars along his carapace, a veteran. He'd killed before. Probably humans. "The spawn violated containment protocol," he buzzed. "Correction is mandatory." The child, Maya, 8 years old, separated from her parents during the invasion of Proxima Station, had only crossed the yellow line painted on the floor. Barely. Her foot had touched it for maybe 2 seconds before she jerked back. But protocols were absolute on Kethran vessels. Everyone knew that. Another impact rocked the ship. Closer this time. Emergency lights flickered red. "She's a child," I said. She didn't understand. Ignorance does not nullify violation. The guard took a step forward. Maya pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide with the kind of terror that comes from watching your world burn. I'd seen that look before. On Titan. On Europa. On every human settlement the Kethran Matriarchy had decided to absorb into their empire. I moved between them. My vision grayed at the edges from the pain, but I stayed upright. "You'll have to go through me." The guard's compound eyes studied me. Calculating. I was already injured, anyone could see that. My prison uniform was torn and blood-stained from the interrogation 3 hours ago. They'd wanted information about Earth's remaining defensive positions. I'd given them nothing but silence and a broken nose for the officer who'd gotten too close. "You are in no condition to." I hit him before he finished the sentence. My right hand was still functional. I drove it into the soft joint where his head met his thorax, exactly where human Kethran combat training said never to strike because you'd never get close enough to land it. He staggered. The shock staff clattered to the floor. Pain exploded through my torso as my broken ribs ground together. I ignored it. Grabbed the staff with my good hand and brought it up in an arc that caught him under the mandibles. The electrical discharge lit up the corridor. He dropped. The ship lurched violently. Something detonated in the distance, a muffled crump that I felt through the deck plates. Alarms began to wail. I leaned against the wall, breathing in shallow gasps. Maya stared at me with something between awe and fear. "It's okay," I managed. "Just stay." The corridor hatch opened. Not the guard entrance. The other one. The one with the royal seal. 4 figures entered. 3 were Kethran Royal Guard, sleeker than the military breed, faster, decorated with the blue and silver markings of the Matriarchy's personal security. They moved with the controlled precision of warriors who never lost a fight. The 4th was different. She was smaller than the guards but carried herself with an authority that made them look like children. Her carapace was deeper blue, almost black, and etched with patterns that seemed to shift in the emergency lighting. Jewelry of some crystalline material hung from her neck and wrists, not decoration, I realized, but symbols of rank. Her compound eyes were larger, more complex, and they fixed on me with an intelligence that was distinctly, unsettlingly aware. A matriarch. Not just any Kethran noble. One of the 73 queens who ruled the empire. The royal guards raised their weapons, plasma rifles, not shock staffs. The kind that would reduce a human to ash. But they didn't fire. They waited. Watching her. The matriarch said nothing. Just looked at me. At the unconscious guard on the floor. At the shock staff in my hand. At Maya behind me. At my injuries, my posture, my eyes. The ship rocked again. A support beam groaned somewhere above us. "We are under attack," the matriarch said. Her voice was different from the guard's, smoother, with harmonics that suggested multiple vocal chambers. A human strike force has breached the primary hull. This vessel will be destroyed within the hour. She continued to watch me. I kept the shock staff raised despite my arms shaking from the effort. You fought with broken bones, she said. It wasn't a question. To protect a spawn, not your own genetic line. Despite certain death. Despite pain. Despite logic. I didn't answer. My vision was tunneling. Blood loss, probably. Or the concussion. But I stayed on my feet. The Matriarch's mandibles moved in a pattern I didn't recognize. One of the royal guards stepped forward and placed something on the floor between us. A medical injector. Catherine military grade, filled with silver fluid. For your injuries, the Matriarch said. You will need full function for what comes next. Another explosion. Closer. The lights went out completely for 3 seconds before the emergency backups kicked in. What comes next? I asked. Survival, the Matriarch said. Or death. I have not yet decided which you have earned. The human strike force hit the barge's engine section with enough explosive force to shake teeth loose. I felt it through the deck, through the walls, through the bones in my legs. The emergency lights strobed once and settled into a dim red pulse that made everything look like it was drowning in blood. The Matriarch didn't move. Neither did her guards. They stood perfectly still, weapons trained on me, waiting for her command like statues carved from living chitin. I looked at the medical injector on the floor. Catherine military medicine was legendary. It could heal almost anything short of death, knit bone and tissue in minutes. It was also how they kept their soldiers fighting through injuries that would drop any other species. But taking it meant trusting her. Trusting a matriarch of the empire that had killed billions of humans. That had turned Earth into a siege world and scattered humanity across the outer colonies like refugees. Maya whimpered behind me. The sound decided it. I bent down, slowly, keeping the shock staff visible, and picked up the injector. The Matriarch's eyes tracked every movement. I pressed it against my neck and felt the sharp sting as it discharged. Cold spread through my body like ice water in my veins, then heat, then something else. Something that made my broken ribs crunch as they shifted back into place. The fractures in my arms sealed with a sensation like fire ants crawling under my skin. The concussion cleared like fog burning off in sunlight. 10 seconds. That's all it took. I straightened fully for the first time in hours and felt strong. Whole. Dangerous. Good, the Matriarch said. Now we discuss terms. Terms? I let the shock staff drop slightly. My arm wasn't shaking anymore. This vessel is lost. The human attack force is well coordinated and equipped with weapons that should not exist in their arsenal. Classified Catherine technology. Someone has been sharing secrets. Her mandibles clicked in what might have been anger. The escape pods are limited. Priority is given by rank and genetic value. I understood immediately. You want something from me. I want context. She gestured at the unconscious guard, at Maya, at me. You are a prisoner. A defeated enemy. Your species is losing this war by every measurable metric. Yet you fought an armed guard while crippled to protect a spawn who shares no blood relation. This behavior is not logical. It is not strategic. It is not survival-oriented. Explain it. Another impact. The corridor tilted 5 degrees and stayed there. Somewhere distant, I heard screaming. Human and Catherine both. She's a child, I said. She's terrified. And he was going to hurt her for something that wasn't her fault. Those are observations, not explanations. It's the only explanation there is. The Matriarch moved closer. Her guards shifted instantly, maintaining their triangle formation around her, weapons tracking me with mechanical precision. She stopped 3 feet away. Close enough that I could see the patterns etched into her carapace weren't decorative, they were scars. Ritual scarring, I realized. Marks of battles won, territories claimed, rivals eliminated. In Catherine culture, she said, a warrior who cannot fight withdraws. Wounded soldiers are relieved of duty until healed. To fight with broken bones is to fight inefficiently. To risk the collective for individual pride. It is the highest dishonor. Good thing I'm not Catherine. Her compound eyes seemed to refract the emergency lights into 1,000 tiny red stars. What are you, then? Human. I said it like it was the simplest truth in the universe. Because it was. The ship groaned. Something in the superstructure gave way with a sound like a giant tearing sheet metal. The tilt increased to 15 degrees. The pods? The matriarch said. Come. Both of you. I pulled Maya close. She grabbed my hand with both of hers, fingers cold and trembling. Why are you helping us? I am not. The matriarch turned and began walking, her guards moving in perfect synchronization around her. I am observing. There is a difference. We followed because there was no other choice. The corridor was chaos. Catherine military personnel running toward defensive positions, automated systems spraying fire suppression foam, whole breaches sealed with emergency bulkheads. We passed a viewport just as the human strike force made another run. I caught a glimpse of 3 frigate-class ships, smaller and faster than the barge, painted with the irregular camouflage that marked them as outer colonies' resistance. Not Earth military. The survivors. The ones who refused to surrender after the core worlds fell. They were magnificent. And they were going to kill everyone on this ship, myself included, if we didn't reach those pods. The matriarch led us through sections I'd never seen, past the prisoner blocks, through secured corridors that required her biometric signature to open, into the ship's interior where the walls were decorated with that same crystalline material as her jewelry. Other Catherines joined us. High-ranking ones. Scientists in gray carapace modifications. Officers with command markings. A few civilians. Yes, the Catherines had civilians, though I'd rarely seen them. All moving with that same eerie calm, following evacuation protocols burned into them through generations of military culture. None of them questioned the matriarch. None of them even looked at me or Maya. We were beneath notice, invisible, except to the royal guards who kept their weapons trained on me with perfect, unwavering focus. The pod bay was a cathedral of metal and purpose. 50 escape pods lined the walls, each one a sleek oval designed to punch through combat zones and atmospheric entry. Half were already gone, launched during the initial attack. The remainder were filling quickly. Catherines filed in with orderly precision, no panic, no rushing. Just efficient evacuation. A coordinator, some kind of logistics officer, approached the matriarch and made a complex gesture with his front limbs. She responded with her own gesture. The officer's eyes found me and Maya lingered, then he clicked his mandibles and moved away. You have been granted pod space, the matriarch said. Row 7, pod 3. I didn't move. Why? Because I have commanded it. That's not an answer. The ship shuddered. This time the impact was close enough to feel the heat through the bulkheads. The human strike force was targeting the engine core now. Smart. Once that went, the whole barge would tear itself apart. The matriarch's guards shifted. One of them made a sound that might have been a warning. But she held up one elegant limb and they froze. On my world, she said. Before the matriarchy unified the clans, we had a saying. Strength without wisdom is merely violence. Wisdom without strength is merely words. But action despite impossibility, that is divinity. You acted when action was irrational. You fought when fighting was impossible. You protected when protection meant death. I do not understand this. But I recognize it. And recognition demands response. Another coordinator approached, moving with urgent speed that Catherines only showed in true emergencies. He spoke rapidly in their harmonic language. The matriarch listened, then dismissed him with a gesture. The human attack force has been hailed, she said. They demand the release of all human prisoners, or they will destroy this vessel with all aboard. They have given us 3 minutes. Maya's hand tightened on mine. I looked at the escape pods, at the Catherines filing into them in their perfect lines. At the matriarch watching me with those complex, unreadable eyes. How many human prisoners are on this ship? I asked. 742. Scattered across 3 detention blocks. Impossible to evacuate in 3 minutes. The math was simple and horrible. The human strike force couldn't dock with the barge, it was too damaged, too unstable. They couldn't board and extract prisoners. All they could do was threaten destruction and hope the Kethrans valued their lives enough to surrender. But Kethrans didn't surrender. It wasn't in their cultural programming. They'd die first, and take the prisoners with them. Unless someone changed the equation. I released Maya's hand and knelt in front of her. Listen carefully. You're going to get in Pod 7-3. You're going to launch with the other evacuees. And you're going to survive this. Understand? What about you? I'll be right behind you. I lied. She was 8. She deserved the comfort of a lie. The matriarch spoke. You intend to return to the detention blocks. The human ships know me. Call sign Frost. I was part of the Titan Defense Force before capture. If I can get to a communications array, I can convince them to hold fire long enough for a proper evacuation. The detention blocks are in the impact zone. You will not survive the journey. Probably not. Definitely not, she corrected. The corridors are compromised. The life support is failing. And the human strike force is targeting that specific section to maximize psychological pressure. They believe all prisoners are concentrated there. They do not know about the labor assignments throughout the ship. She was right. I'd been in detention for 3 days, but before that I'd been on work detail. So had hundreds of others. Scattered throughout the barge in engineering, manufacturing, maintenance. The strike force couldn't know that. They only knew the official detention blocks. Then I'd die, I said. But maybe I'd buy enough time for someone to get a message out. The Royal Guard's weapons tracked me as I stood. The matriarch studied me for a long moment. No, she said finally. Excuse me? You will not return to the detention blocks. You will board the escape pod with the spawn. I will handle the human strike force. I stared at her. You're going to surrender? I am going to communicate. She turned to her guards and spoke in rapid Kethran. They responded immediately, one of them producing a communication device from a compartment in his armor. The matriarch took it and manipulated controls with her delicate manipulator limbs. The communications channel crackled to life. A human voice came through, tense and young. Kethran vessel, you have 90 seconds to begin prisoner release or we fire on your engine core. The matriarch spoke. Her voice came out in perfect English, unaccented, clear. This is Matriarch Savara of the 9th Territorial Fleet. I acknowledge your terms. But I propose an alternative. Silence. Then, Kethrans don't negotiate with terrorists. And humans do not abandon their own. Yet here we are, both acting against type. Listen carefully. This vessel contains 742 human prisoners. It also contains 1,117 Kethran personnel. The damage to our engines makes controlled evacuation impossible in your time frame. If you fire, everyone dies. Human and Kethran both. That's on you. Yes. But it would also be on you. I have a proposal. Cease your attack. Allow evacuation pods to launch. They are unarmed, minimal shielding, easy to track and intercept. Half will be human. Half will be Kethran. You may collect your people from space. We will collect ours. And we will both survive to fight another day. Another silence. Longer. I could imagine the strike force commander weighing options, calculating risks, wondering if this was a trap. Why would you do this? The human voice asked finally. The matriarch's eyes found me. Held my gaze. Because I have witnessed something today that requires further study. And study requires all parties to survive. The human commander didn't respond immediately. The seconds stretched. The ship groaned and tilted further. Emergency systems began their final countdown warnings, automated voices and Catherine announcing hull integrity failure, engine containment breach imminent, all personnel evacuate immediately. 60 seconds, the human voice said. You have 60 seconds to start launching pods. Mixed personnel, as stated. Any tricks and we burn you. Understood. The matriarch closed the channel and handed the device back to her guard. Then, she gestured to the coordinators. Mixed evacuation. Prisoners and personnel, alternating pods. Immediate launch authorization. They moved instantly, reprogramming the evacuation sequence. Catherine's began pulling human prisoners from holding cells I hadn't known existed, people in the same torn uniforms as mine, confused and terrified and suddenly being herded toward escape pods alongside their captors. The matriarch turned to me. You will go now. Pod 7-3. With the spawn. You're really doing this. I am observing, she corrected. And to observe, one must preserve the subject. Go. Maya tugged at my hand. I let her pull me toward the pod. But I looked back at the matriarch one last time. Why? I asked. Really why? Her mandibles moved in that pattern I still didn't recognize. Because you fought with broken bones for a child not your own. And I have ruled for 73 cycles and commanded 1,000,000 warriors and conquered 16 worlds, and I have never seen anything like it. That deserves investigation. Now go. Your people are waiting. The pods sealed around us with a hiss of pressurization. Maya and I were crammed in with 4 other humans, 2 men, 2 women, all strangers, all wearing the same shock of sudden hope. One of them was crying. Another was laughing. The third was completely silent, staring at nothing. Through the small viewport I watched the matriarch standing in the pod bay, perfectly still, as chaos erupted around her. Her guards remained at her sides. She didn't move toward her own pod. Didn't move at all. Just watched as the human pods launched one after another, punching out into space where the outer colony's frigate force was already moving to collect them. Our pod launched. The acceleration pressed us back into the crash seats. Through the viewport I saw the barge receding, a massive wounded beast trailing atmosphere and debris, escape pods scattering from it like seeds from a dying flower. And somewhere on that ship, a matriarch who'd broken every protocol she'd been raised with because a human had done the same. The strike force held their fire. The pods scattered across space, beacons active, transponders identifying human and Catherine signatures. The frigates moved with practiced precision, collection fields activating, tractor beams pulling human pods into their bays while leaving the Catherine ones to drift toward their own rescue ships jumping in from the outer system. Maya was still holding my hand. She hadn't let go since the detention block. Are we safe? She whispered. I watched the barge through the viewport. Its engine core was glowing now, radiation leaking through failing containment. It wouldn't last another 10 minutes. But the evacuation was almost complete. Pods were still launching, still scattering, still being collected by both sides. Yeah, I said. We're safe. The engine core breached. The barge tore itself apart in a bloom of light that made the viewport automatically darken. When it cleared, there was only debris and escape pods and the 2 sides of the war collecting their people. Our pod shuddered as a tractor beam locked on. The frigate's bay opened ahead of us, a mouth of light and safety and home. We drifted in with a dozen other pods, all human, all carrying people who'd expected to die today. The bay pressurized. The pod hatch opened. Hands reached in, human hands, wearing outer colony's resistance uniforms, speaking in accents from a dozen different settlements. They pulled us out gently, professionally, processing each person with medical scanners and trauma protocols and the kind of careful efficiency that came from doing this too many times. Maya was taken by a medic. She looked back at me once, still scared, still holding on to hope with both hands. Then, she was gone into the press of survivors and rescuers. I stood in the frigate bay and watched through the force field as Catherine rescue ships collected their pods. Sleek cruisers with the matriarchy symbols blazing on their hulls, moving with that same eerie precision, That same perfect coordination. And somewhere in one of those pods was a matriarch who'd chosen observation over doctrine. A resistance officer approached me. Commander's insignia, Titan accent, eyes that had seen too much. Call sign? Frost. Titan Defense Force. Captured during the final stand. He made a note on his datapad. You'll need debriefing. Full medical. Psychological evaluation. Standard protocol for recovered prisoners. Understood. He hesitated. The Kethrin transmission. The one that authorized mixed evacuation. That's never happened before. Not once in 12 years of war. Command wants to know why. I looked out at the Kethrin rescue ships, at the debris field where the barge had been, at the invisible line in space where two enemies had just cooperated to save each other. Because someone saw something worth investigating, I said. The debriefing took 6 hours. They wanted every detail. My capture, my interrogation, the conditions on the barge, the guard I'd fought, the matriarch, her words, her actions, everything. I gave them all of it except one thing. I didn't tell them that I'd seen something in the matriarch's eyes. Something like recognition. Like she'd been searching for proof of a theory and found it in a damaged human protecting a child. Whatever that theory was, it wasn't for military intelligence. It was bigger. Stranger. More dangerous than fleet movements or tactical intelligence. They cleared me eventually. Medical pronounced me fit. The Kethrin injector had done its work too well to leave any evidence of injury. Psychological flagged me for follow-up but didn't ground me. And command assigned me to a new unit being formed from recovered prisoners. The ones who'd survived captivity and were willing to fight again. I took the assignment. What else was there? But 3 weeks later, as my new unit was running drills in the outer asteroid belt, our communications officer picked up a transmission. Kethrin frequency. Tight beam. Encrypted with a code that took our AI an hour to crack. It was addressed to me. Specifically. By name and call sign. The message was simple. I have continued my observations. Your species fights with broken bones as standard practice. This changes strategic calculations significantly. Propose a meeting. Neutral territory. You and I only. If interested, respond on this frequency. If not, I will not contact you again. Matriarch Savara. The unit commander brought it to me personally. What the hell is this, Frost? I read it 3 times. Checked the encryption signature. Verified it was genuinely from Kethrin Systems. Looked for any sign of a trap. Permission to respond, sir. Are you insane? This is obviously, she saved 742 human prisoners when she could have let them die. She broke Kethrin protocol to do it. And now she wants to talk. She wants intelligence. She wants to understand our tactics so she can counter them. Maybe. I looked at the message again. At the specific phrasing. Or maybe she wants to understand something else. The commander didn't authorize a response. But he didn't forbid one either. That was the thing about Resistance Command, they understood flexibility. Understood that sometimes the rules existed to be tested. I thought about it for 2 days. Considered every angle. Every possible trap. Every strategic implication. Then I sent a reply on the same encrypted frequency. Neutral territory. No weapons. No guards. Just conversation. Name the place. Her response came within an hour. Coordinates attached. 1 week. I will be there. Will you? The coordinates were for a dead moon orbiting a gas giant in unclaimed space. No strategic value. No resources. No reason for either side to care about it except as a meeting point. I didn't tell command. Didn't tell my unit. Didn't tell anyone except the pilot I bribed to take me there in a scout ship, and he didn't ask questions as long as the credits transferred. The moon was exactly as described, airless, lifeless, nothing but gray regolith and ancient impact craters. The pilot dropped me in a pressure suit with 72 hours of air and a beacon to call for extraction. Then, he jumped out, leaving me alone with the stars and the waiting. She arrived 6 hours later. A single Catherine shuttle, unmarked, descending with the kind of precision that suggested an expert pilot. It landed 200 meters from my position. The ramp extended. And the Matriarch walked out, alone, in a pressure suit adapted for her physiology. No guards. No weapons visible. Just her, walking across the lunar surface toward me like this was the most natural thing in the universe. We met in the shadow of a crater rim. 2 enemies. 2 individuals. 2 mysteries studying each other. Her voice came through the radio frequency. You came. You sound surprised. I estimated 63% probability. Higher than average for trust scenarios between hostile species, but still uncertain. I am pleased my calculations were inadequate. We stood there for a moment. The gas giant hung above us, swirls of color and storm systems painting the sky. Why are we here? I asked. To discuss an impossibility, she said. On my world, survival is logical. Strategy is mathematical. Evolution is optimization. We fight when fighting has positive expected value. We retreat when retreat maximizes collective survival. We cooperate when cooperation serves genetic interest. Everything has a reason. Everything calculates. Everything makes sense. She paused. The gas giant's light reflected off her helmet. Then I watched you fight with broken bones for a child who shares no genetic relation. Who provides no strategic advantage. Who could not repay the debt. And you did it knowing you would likely die. That is impossible. Yet I witnessed it. So I must conclude that either my understanding of impossibility is flawed, or your species operates on principles I do not comprehend. I must know which. I looked up at the stars. At the vast darkness between them. At the endless war being fought across that darkness. We're human, I said. That's the only principle. We protect each other not because it makes sense but because it's right. We fight impossible battles not because we'll win but because surrender isn't in our vocabulary. We break ourselves to save strangers because that's what humanity means. It's not logical. It's not strategic. It's just us. That is insufficient explanation. It's the only one I have. She moved closer. Not threatening. Just studying. My species has conquered 16 worlds. Absorbed 42 separate civilizations. Optimized our empire across 1,000 systems. We are efficient. We are powerful. We are superior by every quantifiable metric. Yet we are losing this war. Slowly. Incrementally. Against all strategic logic. And I believe I have finally understood why. Tell me. Because you fight with broken bones. All of you. Your entire species. You fight when fighting is impossible. You hope when hope is irrational. You sacrifice when sacrifice has no value. And that makes you unpredictable. Unstoppable. Terrifying. Because we cannot calculate impossibility. We can only observe it. And observation suggests that impossibility may be stronger than optimization. The gas giant rotated slowly above us. Stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And 2 enemies stood in the dark, discussing the nature of war and humanity and what it meant to fight despite logic. So what now? I asked. Now I return to my fleet. I report my findings. And I recommend strategic recalculation. Because a species that fights with broken bones cannot be defeated through conventional metrics. They can only be understood. And understanding requires something my people have never attempted before. What? Learning from the enemy. She turned and began walking back toward her shuttle. I watched her go. Then called out, Matriarch. Why did you really save those prisoners? Not the strategic reason. The real one. She stopped. Turned back. The radio carried her words clearly. Because I saw a human fight with broken bones and I froze in awe. And in 73 cycles of command, I have never frozen before. That deserved honor. So I gave it. She walked away. Her shuttle lifted off, thrusters kicking up regolith that sparkled in the gas giant's light. I stood alone on the dead moon and watched her disappear into the stars. My extraction came 8 hours later. The pilot didn't ask questions. I didn't volunteer answers. We jumped back to Resistance space and I returned to my unit, and the war continued exactly as it had before. Except it didn't. Not really. Because 3 months later, a Kethran fleet engaged our forces at the Callisto Junction and then withdrew without pressing their advantage when human civilian transports were detected in the combat zone. 6 months after that, a Kethran commander requested parley instead of bombardment at the Enceladus settlements. A year later, formal communication channels opened between certain Kethran matriarchs and human resistance leaders. The war didn't end. Wars don't end cleanly. But it changed. Shifted. Evolved into something that had space for conversation alongside combat. For understanding alongside conflict. And sometimes, late at night, I wondered if somewhere in Kethran space, a matriarch was teaching her warriors about impossibility. About fighting with broken bones. About the strange human principle that made them dangerous not despite their wounds but because of them. I never received another message from her. Never saw her again. Never knew if her recommendations were accepted or rejected by her people. But Maya survived. She was evacuated to a colony world, reunited with parents who'd thought her dead, grew up in a settlement that was no longer under constant threat of invasion. And 40 years later, when the first formal peace treaty was signed between humanity and the Kethran matriarchy, I saw her in the crowd. A grown woman. A diplomat. Someone who'd built her life from the ashes of war. She saw me too. Crossed the room despite the press of dignitaries and politicians and military brass. And she said 5 words. "You fought with broken bones." I smiled. "It's what we do." She hugged me. And I understood then what the matriarch had been searching for. Not tactical intelligence. Not strategic advantage. Just proof that impossibility existed. That logic had limits. That somewhere in the universe, principles mattered more than calculations. We're human. We fight with broken bones. We protect strangers. We hope against reason. We make impossible choices and impossible stands and impossible sacrifices. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe notices. Freezes in awe. And changes because of it. That's not strategy. That's not optimization. That's not evolution. That's humanity. And it's enough. 2/2